and my shield, in whom my heart trusts. And I am helped, my heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to the Eternal. The Eternal is the strength of God's people, who is the saving refuge of God's anointed. O save your people, bless your heritage, be their shepherd and carry them forward. We praise you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe. You have been our source of strength and righteousness throughout the ages, and the faithful God, whose word is indeed, whose every word is true and just. For the Torah, for the privilege of worship, for the prophets, and for the Sabbath day, which you, eternal God, have given us for holiness and rest, for honor and beauty. For all those we offer thanks. May all the living come to praise your name forever. We praise you, O God, for the holiness of the Sabbath.
Thank you, Corinne, for this beautiful reading. I would like to invite Martin Silk to lead us in the community prayer.
Eternal God, we ask your blessing on our Queen Elizabeth and all the royal family, as well as those who govern our country, with a spirit of wisdom and compassion, so that they care for the citizen and the stranger, and bring benefit to the inhabitants of our country and the world. Bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel. Bless our congregation and all its members. Be with those who seek your presence and all who are in need of healing, spiritual or physical. Let them know that you are near to comfort and sustain them. And especially this week, with the bombs and mortars raining down on Israel and Palestine, may peace exist in the state of Israel soon and in our time. May you, eternal God, grant blessing to her, established as an age-old dream and home to the oppressed. May its leaders and citizens be inspired with the faithfulness to the aims of its founders, and may the country be imbued with the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice always. May this Sabbath renew our energy to build and sustain a better world, and to deepen our gratitude of so much that surrounds us. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. And we are counting, I think, the last day of the Omer today. So if you have your Siddur and you want to move to page 578 for the Omer, you shall count 7 weeks from the day after the Sabbath, when a sheaf of grain is to be brought as an offering, so that the day after the 7th week will make it 50 days. In observance of that tradition, we count the days of the early harvest season of ancient Israel, from Pesach till Shavuot, and so symbolically walk once more the road from Egypt to Mount Sinai, from liberty to law, from freedom to responsibility. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, al sfirat ha'omer. And today is the 49th day, making 7 weeks of the Omer. And we are back to the normal order of things on page 486. Odo? Odo? No. Odo aleres v'shamayim v'yaren keren le'amo v'hila v'chol chasidav lifnei Yisrael am kerovu. Alleluia, Alleluia. And we read responsively from page 488 God's teaching is perfect. David or Franklin, would you be the responsive people?
Reviving the soul,
God's word is unfailing.
making wise the simple,
God's precepts are right.
delighting the mind,
God's commandments are clear.
enlightening the eyes,
God's doctrine is pure.
enduring forever,
God's guidance is true.
and altogether just.
Behold, a good doctrine has been given you. Do not forsake it. It is a tree of life to those who hold it fast, and all who cling to it find happiness. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. So the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, describes a 40-year journey through wilderness on the way to the promised land. It feels rather long to have a whole book of Torah dedicated to just talking about what we were doing in the desert. But what are those 40 years? There might be 40 years of desert, but they are a very important stage in our development as a people and in our journey from slavery to freedom. Whether you believe in the historic reality of the story or in the geographic accuracy, the wilderness is a metaphor to help us understand who we are and what we should be doing. By making this into important narrative, Torah gives us a clue about the incredible achievement that freedom is. Leaving Egypt was a euphoric moment. It was glorious, it was victory, pure triumph. But actually, that moment was easier than having to battle with the difficulties and the complications of daily life in the desert and establish a community that functions. So we achieved freedom in triumph. And now we have to gather food, we have to set up tents, and as you know, there's always a peg or a pole missing. We have to make sure that there are rules and policies in place and that we have a leadership that is strong and competent. So as you know, because it's not the first time we read this story, there were quite a few hiccups and problems, and people didn't like the food. And they even had some sort of Egypt, what's it called again, when you remember something with more fondness than you should. Nostalgia. They had Egypt nostalgia, because they remember the time when they had all that delicious food and the fish they had for free, etc. And they wouldn't quit complaining for ages until Moses got really sick and tired. He couldn't take it anymore. And he complained to God about having been given this really difficult, irritating lot to look after. But in spite of these teething problems, during our years in the wilderness, we who started as slaves gave birth to a generation who was born in freedom. I remember when I was a kid, my dad making the comparison between this story and Romania in the early 1990s. I think it was on the news, and I was asking, I couldn't understand why Romania was such a dangerous, violent country at the time, with a lot of social problems and gun crime, and there was the mafia and all sorts. And I didn't understand because they had just toppled their dictator, Ceausescu, and so I thought, you know, they should just make the most of it now and try to be happy, and, you know, this was their chance of having an amazing free country. And maybe I was a very naive child. But he replied that it was like they had just come out of the desert, like they were in the desert, having just come out of Egypt. and that it would take a while before they, as a society, gain the maturity of a people rising up to the challenges of life in freedom with responsibility. And I think he was right, because as we have seen after, now Romania is strong of a couple of generations who were born in freedom. And as a country, they've been transformed for the better by their years in the wilderness. The years of hardship in the wilderness and the very long journey transformed a people, and I'm talking about us again now, who not so long before was a defeated, crushed, scared, downtrodden people, into a people with strength and self-respect. The Israelites at Sinai are very different from who they were at the time that they were taken out of Egypt. Even the fact that we often say taken out of Egypt implies a lack of agency and a passiveness, or a passivity, whatever the correct word is, that we no longer have when we are standing at Sinai, ready to stand up for ourselves and fight our own battles. Our years in the wilderness have transformed us into a grown-up community committed to one another and to the covenant that connects us together. I've been thinking a lot recently, partly because of my work, about another sort of coming out of Egypt recently, which is the government's roadmap out of COVID and the much anticipated lifting of social contact restrictions, the reopening of the restaurants and the pubs and the gyms and the cinemas, all the places that we want to go back to, including our places of worship. So I don't know if Tamara and other members of the FPS executive will agree with me, but it feels somehow that the lifting of the restrictions is like a glorious coming out of Egypt, but that it will actually mark the start of a period of wilderness, with all the hard work of making sure that the whole congregation can gather safely when restrictions are lifted, but actually COVID is still around, so we can't really go back suddenly from one day to the next. So there'll be a lot of, just like there was a lot of gathering food and pitching tents, I think in this there'll be a lot of making sure that the risks are assessed and the leadership is strong and sure of itself, and they bear the responsibility for all of us to get to the other side safely at the end of our wandering through COVID and lockdown. And I have thought of lots of other examples of wilderness, sometimes about the very personal lives of people I know, friends and family, like the friend who left a dangerously abusive marriage and who, after the liberating sense of having left, had to wander through years of financial difficulties and psychological trauma before reaching a settled place of safety and happiness. And I was thinking as well of that friend of my parents who was a respected teacher in Algeria and had to flee, I think in the early 90s, had to flee violence in Algeria, and his family was killed, and he came to Belgium, which was, coming out of Egypt. But when he got there, he realized that the French that he thought he could speak, actually it wasn't quite the same French, and nobody would understand him. He was terribly lonely, and he couldn't get his diplomas recognized in his new country, so he couldn't get a job. So eventually, he did get to the promised land of a happier life with a new family and friends and a job that he liked, but it took some years of wandering through the desert. So there is always a promised land, but the only way to get through it is through the wilderness. There is no way to get to our promised land other than wandering through the desert first, and we just have to get through it, helping each other out and looking out for one another. Shabbat Shalom. And we now move to page 520 for the Aleinu. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, אשר שם חלקנו לייחד את שמו, וגורלנו להמליך מלכותו, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבת על לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. Trusting in you, eternal God, we hope soon to behold the glory of your might, when false gods will vanish from our hearts and idolatry cease forever. Help us to perfect the world by bringing it under your unchallenged rule, when all will invoke your name, relinquish evil, and turn to you alone. May all who dwell on earth come to know that to you every knee must bend, and every tongue swear loyalty. Before you, let them humble themselves, and to your glorious name let them give honor. Let all submit to your sovereign rule. May that time come soon and last forever. For ultimate sovereignty is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory, as it is written, the Eternal One shall reign forever. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו It is hard to feel serene when our world is not complete, when those who once brought wholeness to our life have gone. Yet in the emptiness their passing leaves behind, we are not alone. For we have the companionship of the living, and even our loved ones who have died live on in our hearts. For what they were is part of what we have become. This week we remember Benny Press, father of Nicola Marzel, Brian Rees, father of Alison Rees, Joseph Singer, father of Trish Baines, and Frederick Williamson, grandfather of Dean Staker. We honor them best when we live as they would wish, responsibly and happily, even in the shadow of our loss, and so draw closer to the source of life, in whom every life finds meaning, purpose, and hope. And we read together. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה, ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל בני אדם ואמרו אמן. Tamara, have you got
Yes. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. Alex and Franklin, thank you so much for leading this morning's service for us. We're really very grateful And Alex, thank you to you both for laning Torah so beautifully, which I know is so much enjoyed by everyone in the congregation, and for your really illuminating commentary on this morning's portion, which made it so vividly and movingly relevant to us. And I feel that you really helped the Torah portion this morning to speak directly to our hearts and to our experience in our present shared predicament. And I'm so grateful to you for that. And thank you to all of the volunteers who made this morning's service possible, and of course to everyone who participated in the service this morning, to Chris, to Corinne, and to Martin. Thank you. I've got some community announcements to make. They start straight away today. This evening there's a special event, an unusual event, I think, for us, from 8 to 9:15, called Elu Ve'elu. It's a Havdalah and discussion with liberal and reform rabbis, and I think that's what's so distinctive about it, that both liberal and reform movements are coming together really to open up a space for us to hear one another and to hold on to what is sacred, they say, after the terrible events this week in Israel and Palestine. And there's a link to that event in today's email. I think many of us will be really feeling a need, a thirst for that support and that guidance from our rabbis at this moment. You do need to pre-register, so please click through to the email if you'd like to attend that event, which, as I say, is tonight. It's a Havdalah and discussion, 8 to 9:15. Tomorrow morning, as we're preparing ourselves for Shavuot, Rabbi Rebecca is leading a Torah study session in Cafe Ivrea at 10 o'clock. It's on the subject of In the Shadow of Sinai, Breast Milk and Torah. Is there only one way to be a Jew? So that promises to be a really interesting conversation. And I know that having heard feedback from many of you about the biennial, how much we all enjoy it when we are able to benefit from having lots of different liberal communities come together and to hear from different liberal rabbis. And we're celebrating Shavuot this year all together with liberal Judaism. So starting tomorrow night at 7:30 is Liberal Judaism's Tikkun Leil Shavuot, a night of Jewish learning online. The highlight will definitely be an interview with Professor Judith Plaskow, who was the author of Standing Again at Sinai, Judaism from a feminist perspective. She's being interviewed by Rebecca. That groundbreaking book, I think, has probably affected all of us more than we know, and not least because Rebecca says that Judith Plaskow was the person who most influenced her decision to become a rabbi. So, you know, that's at now, have I got the correct time here? I think 9:45 tonight, but again, tomorrow night, check the email for that event. And again, on the same evening, tomorrow evening, Rebecca, there's a Rabbis at Midnight session, and Rebecca will be teaching the Book of Ruth on the subject, Is Ruth an Agent of Change? And the details for all of these Shavuot events can be found in our email, but on Monday morning, there's a 5 a.m. Shacharit service, very early, led by Rabbi Igor Zinkov, who's just about a good enough reason to get up at 5:30. I think he at 5 rather. He's if you're not familiar with him, let's put it this way: if you can't get up at 5, we can probably still watch it on YouTube later. And at 11 a.m. there's a Shavuot morning service led by Rabbi Alexandra Wright. This week on Thursday at 7:30, there's the second in the Beit Midrash series, Escape from Tyranny. This session is called A Ray of Sunshine in Utter Darkness. Leslie Urbach will be leading a discussion of Josiah Wedgwood, MP. And that brings us to the end of the week. And next week, we will indeed be returning to the building. And thank you again, Alex, for giving all of the community something to reflect on as we think about what it's going to be like for us coming back to the synagogue, because Friday night, next Shabbat, and Saturday morning will be the first time that we have a congregation again in the synagogue. And you're so right, Alex, that I think it's going to be a period of experiment. We're going to get some things wrong. It's going to be a bit messy. It will take a while for us to feel really confident about this, except that I will say it will be well organized. It will be safe. So please do come and join us. There'll be a limit of 20 people in the building for services. You will need to pre-register as well. But I can say that I just really look forward to seeing some of you in person in the building next Shabbat on Friday and Saturday. And that's everything I have to say this morning. Thank you all. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Tamara. And Paul has made a special request for something a little different this week to finish the service, and we will conclude with Adon Olam. Adon Olam Asher Mala B'terem kol yetzir nivra le'ed nasa b'rav tzukah azay melech shemo nikra ve'acharik yichlot hakol levado yimloch nora ve'hu haya ve'hu hove ve'hu yeh betifara ve'hu echad ve'en sheni להגדילו להגבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה והוא אלי וחגואלי וצורף לי בעת צרה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוזי ביום אקרא בידו אפקיד רוחי בידו והעירה ועם רוחי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא אירא. May the Eternal One God, you're going out and you're coming in, now and always. And Franklin is going to join us to make Kiddush.
If you'd like to follow the Kiddush, you can do so on page 566. Zocho et Yom HaShabbat l'Kodsho. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן.
Amen.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המוציא לחם מן הארץ.
Amen.
This is the first, not on a communion.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you everyone for joining us on Facebook and
Shabbat
YouTube.